Okay, let's see here.
Hi there. And welcome everybody. I think we're ready to start. Steve, if you are, and Sky, if you are. Okay, let's see here.
Okay, I'm here. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So good afternoon.
I'm here.
Right.
Hey everybody, and my apologies for this very unprofessional start of our conversation today. It has proved to be a wacky day, but I'm doing the best I can.
Well, we're glad you're here. So I just want to welcome everybody who's attending today. My name is Karen Burkhardt. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Springs World Affairs Council, and we're pleased to welcome you all to today's program, America and the World in a New Administration, with our speaker, Steve Clemons, Editor-at-Large at The Hill. So just a few functions about submitting questions and comments. If you're attending via webinar, which you all are, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a chat function. For general comments that can be seen by all participants, there's also a Q&A function for submitting written questions and a raise hand function if you'd like to ask a verbal question directly. And so we will be deferring questions until after the presentation, so please be patient if you have your hand up. Let's take a moment and thank our supporters. I want to thank the Clemons Foundation, Wells Fargo Private Bank, Richard Petritz Foundation, Mackenzie Place, and all of our institutional members, the El Pomar Foundation, Colorado College, the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs, Pikes Peak Community College, Colorado Springs Chamber and EDC, SIVA Charter High School, and Fountain Valley High School. And also thank you to all of our premium members. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to our Emeritus Board Member, Sky Forster, who is going to introduce today's speaker.
Okay.
Thank you, Karen. I hope everyone can hear me all right. I'm having to do this from my phone rather than my computer, thanks to internet issues today. I am delighted to be able to introduce my good friend, Steve Clemons, back to Colorado Springs for, I lost track, Steve, 3, 4, 5 times that you've been here. And each one has been a spectacular visit. And we look forward to bringing you back when we can actually bring you back. We know your day has been a challenging one, that you're holding up the fort at the Hill by yourself pretty much today because of illness of your colleagues, and that's the world we live in. But we appreciate your being able to join us at this time, and we were able to accommodate the schedule as to fit what you needed to do. For those who don't know Steve Clemons, he is currently editor-at-large of The Hill, which is America's most read political media platform. Also hosts a weekly news show called The Bottom Line. Before then, he was Washington editor-at-large of The Atlantic and editor-in-chief of Atlantic Live, that publication's 3D journalism channel. He's also served as editor-at-large of the National Journal and of Quartz, a digital native finance and trade focused publication. He has previously served as executive vice president of the New America Foundation, led its American Strategy program, also published a very popular political blog, The Washington Note. Before that, he was executive vice president and senior policy advisor to Senator Jeff Bingaman, executive vice president of the Economic Strategy Institute, and the first executive director of the Nixon Center. Now, if you're paying attention to all that, what you really get is a picture of a man who is well respected and experienced on all sides of the aisle. I don't even say both sides of the aisle anymore because I don't think they're just two. But he is a man who knows everyone. Everyone seems to know him, and more important, respects him. And that's what makes him such the good journalist and commentator that he is. I'm going to stop there. Steve, I think you are going to take, because of your schedule, you're going to make more abbreviated remarks and come back and open this up to Q&A from all of us. And but given the events, I just prelude by saying, given the events of this past week, which are stirring and stupendous, as the understatement of the year, that we look forward to your comments on where we go from here as the administration, as new administration takes over next week. So, Steve, thanks very much for being able to make it so that you could join us in this event, and we look forward to your comments.
Well, thank you, Sky, and greetings, everyone. First of all, to Karen and to Sky, thank you so much. I will tell you something that I don't say to other World Affairs Councils. I don't tell them they're my favorite World Affairs Council. The Colorado Springs World Affairs Council is, we have been loyal to one another, I to you and you to me, in these many years. And I understand, you know, the complexity of perspective out there, and I think we've been true to that every time I've been out there. I just regret that I'm not with you. I should also say I'm sitting in a very bland office right now, just connected to the Hill TV studio, just interviewed a few congressmen, you know, that I had to do covering for a colleague of mine. And so what you see behind me is my Eastern Shore home. So I'm sitting in a really crappy, dingy looking office. I just don't want you to see it right now. So what I'd like to do is maybe talk for 10 or so minutes and then answer your questions. I mean, we're at an inflection point in American history, and I think I don't need to tell you about all of the, you know, goings on. All of you have it. All of you may have your perspective on, you know, how you think the election went, what you think the social contract in this country should be, and how you feel about January 6th and what occurred. What I will tell you is that I'm on K Street in Washington, D.C., between 16th and 17th Streets, if you're familiar with Washington. My office, which is on the 10th floor, looks out on the street. And what I see is an unbelievable line in the last 2 hours of barricades that have gone up and down the street that are creating a high fence and wall here. And what I've been told, and this is K Street, this isn't even near the mall, but when you kind of look at what's happened to the shutdown of Washington right now, the deployment of troops, we're at a very serious moment. So this is not something that happens every day. And there's a lot of anxiety. But let's talk about, you know, the international dimensions and America in the world in this period of time and this inflection point of where we want to go. You know, I think that when you think about the moment, I think some people, some nations have found areas of the Trump administration's policy to align with. I think if you look at China, for instance, is an area where there's bipartisan support for a different track with China. Perhaps not, you know, a collision course towards war, but at least a muscling up and strengthening up, a defining of America's economic and national security interests, and the resolve to do something, to sort of, you know, look at, you know, technology competition, to look at trade, to look at what's going on in the South China Sea, what's going on with our alliances, and put muscle and bone around that in a way that may not have happened. What Donald Trump positively did, Democrats will say this as well, including Chuck Schumer, is he created the punctuation point, the emphasis around it to be secure. What I think you're going to see the Biden administration begin to try and do is to figure out how do you get off a collision course, but at the same time begin looking at a cohesive national security and economic strategy that other allies can be part of. And I mention allies now because one of the things we've gone through, whether, you know, you agree with it or not agree with it, whether you agree that, you know, think that allies have been free riding on American leadership in the world, or whether you think they've been cooperating with us, is that it's been a tough time for most of America's allies during the last several years. They have not received the kind of predictable, I wouldn't just say respect, but the predictable relationship, the predictable contours of a relationship with the United States where they could depend on the United States, and their national security simulators could depend upon the United States being with them in their dark days, whatever those dark days may be. Ours was 9/11/2001, and Article 5 of NATO was invoked so that other nations came to our defense and security for the first time and deployed, you know, out of area in Afghanistan and other places to do that. The question is that a reciprocal relationship where American resolve and American commitment to our allies is as strong as our allies' support was of us then? And I think there are doubts about that. I think we have to, you know, this is one of the meta themes I want to talk about, is that I think Nothing can be taken for granted right now. We cannot take for granted our allies. They will not take for granted us. And that means that trust is in deficit in our best relationships in the world. And that has created opportunities for foes to begin moving their agendas. I think one of the last couple of times I've been, at the World Affairs Council in Colorado Springs, is we talked about how the world had become more interconnected, how globalization had become, at least for a time, a commitment to a higher and higher trust world where people and ideas and institutions and money and investment could travel around the world in a higher trust framework. Well, those frameworks have come undone. They become frayed. We still are all connected, but there's a lot more fear out there. And I think that transition from a high trust world to a higher fear world has also been copied and mimicked somewhat by domestic American politics. Trust is diminished, trust in each other, empathy is diminished. And there's a kind of zero-sum dynamic domestically in America, which we have seen manifested globally as well. I don't know why that is, but I do know that in fact, there's a lot of mistrust out there. One of the things that I saw when the Trump administration come in again, and something I mentioned to some of you when I was out in Colorado Springs the last time, is that I have a lot of relatives in the Midwest who voted and supported for the Trump administration, supported the Trump administration, who felt demeaned, pushed aside, and kind of looked down on by the Democratic establishment. And just, maybe that's true, maybe it's a cop-out, I don't know. What I do know is things like the 2008-2009 financial crisis, which preceded Donald Trump, were a major impact. Now that you look back, that was a major impact in both America's domestic situation and its international situation. And let me explain to you what I mean. Domestically, it further divided the New York finance money types from Main Street. It further divided parts of the country that were in manufacturing and had seen their jobs shipped overseas from those that were in the service sector. You had a whole core of people, many of my relatives who fought in generations of wars, like Sky Forster's family, who had, who for this was a joke. They believe they fought the Cold War, but China won. That's a tangible, palpable thing for those families. And we're debating that today. It used to be kind of joked about, but it is no joke to those families. And, I remember interviewing then Vice President Biden in 2016 that had said the Democratic Party had become a party of snobs and that it had to fix that. So that's his challenge. And so let me just say that's part one, the domestic side. The international side of that is that when you look at the question of what America first meant, is it meant that the social contract that America had with its institutions, its places around the world, that what had happened was that sense that to many Americans, that international engagement, participation and membership and leadership in NATO, participation and allies with Japan and South Korea and Australia, all of the kinds of things that we were doing. I just interviewed Karen Kornblue a few minutes ago, who's our former ambassador to the OECD, and looking at America's deep integration into Europe and whatnot, and looking at benchmarking, education, healthcare, climate change, all of these issues that we work across the board, is that many Americans began to feel an exhaustion from that rather than feeling buoyed up by it. Maybe that is a function that they don't understand it, or maybe it is a function that we have uneven benefits and costs in our society. So these international questions are very much part of the domestic realities of people. And I think with the Biden team coming in, and I don't want to be rah-rah for Joe Biden. I know Joe Biden and his team extremely well. I'm going to be writing about it shortly and happy to pass it off to Karen and Sky, the piece I'm writing, where I kind of look at Anthony Blinken and Samantha Power, who's now going to be head of USAID. Tony Blinken's going to be our foreign secretary, our state, Secretary of State. Jake Sullivan, longtime friend, as the National Security Advisor. Wendy Sherman is going to be Deputy Secretary of State, and others. There are a lot of names out there that know, and they're all competent in this place. The question is, competence only gets you so far. The question is, what's the strategy and vision in a world that doubts America? Say what you will. The world doubts America. It just is what it is. And we have complicated realities with China, which is on the move and on the rise. We have complicated realities with Russia, another big global stakeholder that has apparently hacked many of the national security cyber environs that we have there. And that is going to be the next big challenge for this country after, when business first comes in and we kind of deal with whatever's going to happen with the impeachment stuff. The next big thing is how to deal with the vulnerability of the U.S. national security architecture to the hacking. I just got off an interview with John Katko of New York, who's just become the ranking member of the Homeland Security Committee in the House. And he said there is no bigger concern right now. So I think when you kind of look at these big issues that are out there, Biden and his team is going to have a problem of looking at how do they move simultaneously, looking at how you take care of the domestic house, getting the domestic house in order, trying to get Americans to even talk to one another again, to understand that a lot of Americans are frustrated and angry about the political outcome, and they've been led down that path. But how do you not further demean them? How do you not further just leave them on the side, of events and bring them in? I think that's going to be very important. But that's going to be hard to do while simultaneously letting Japan think, yes, we're still your great ally. Letting Germany, yes, no, you're still a great ally. Going to Eastern Europe and said, yes, we'll stand with you against autocracy from Orban in Hungary or the spread of trouble from Russia. And, the other dimension of this, which isn't oft talked about yet, is that because the Democrats have a 50-50 balance with the Republicans in the Senate, Joe Biden, who is a foreign policy guy, but he's not going to be able to be on many planes flying abroad very much. He also can't easily send his vice president, who's got to be around to be the tiebreaker on a lot of votes. So we have an interesting challenge where they've got to figure out how to use this excellent staff, and what I do believe they are excellent, to prop up a strategy and vision for American engagement and problem solving, and that's going to be climate. Some of this is going to be low-hanging fruit, but parts of it are going to be difficult. How do we get into the Middle East further in a way that builds on the Abraham Accords, again, of the Trump administration, but do it in a way that looks as if we are adding a net add to that? How are we going to deal with China and Russia? How are we going to deal with trouble down in Latin America? Latin America is constantly a schizophrenic challenge for the United States of hyper engagement from the U.S. and then hyper ignoring it, which is equally as bad. And so I think, there are a lot of these issues that are out there. Let me just finish, because I want to get to your guys' questions, that I don't think this is the time where those folks who try to say we know what will unfold or happen, no one knows, because we don't know to what degree, even if Biden comes out. I know the Biden doctrine is one that's very much centered around his personal relationships with leaders, or his ability to read leaders and their bandwidth for being able to move where they go one way or another and being able to work at that level. That is not a national security strategy. That's a person-to-person strategy that can be useful tactically, but it does not articulate a strategic vision of the priorities of the country, what battles you're going to lose to win what we most win. That is absent thus far, and there's nothing I've seen from Biden land yet that tells us what that will look like, other than we brought a lot of former staff people of the Obama administration who were staff people on the most part, who are going to be good technicians and good, competent managers who have to lure back highly competent people in government when many people have left government. That these are going to be Herculean tasks in this moment, at the same time that many nations of the world are going to feel needy and want affirmations that America is back like it used to, which is going to be hard to do, or we're going to be tested by foes to see what is America really about. Are we going to deliver or not to our allies? Are we going to deliver consequences for rogue states that create problems? So it's going to be a mess. And that is my message for you. It's going to be a mess. It's going to be a messy time. We don't get the benefit of neat lines as we proceed forward. So on that perhaps unsatisfactory note, let me end and then come to all of you for questions and whatnot.
Thank you very much, Steve. A lot for us to digest. Let me start with one reflection on the George W. Bush administration 43, which in many ways is like this one, in that this administration, the Biden administration, as you pointed out, is going to be bringing in a lot of competent, highly experienced people from other administrations. In a similar way, the Bush 43 administration was filled from the beginning with a similarly highly experienced group of people who had been in George W. Bush's father's administration and prior Reagan or Republican administrations. And the question that I was asked once about that administration was, what did I think of them? And I said, well, they're experienced, but I have one question, and I have the same question about this one. That team, as experienced as it is going to be coming back into power from having been in power. Will they decide that they're going to pick up where they left off? Or do they understand that the world had fundamentally changed in the 8 years between Bush 41 and Bush 43, or indeed in the 4 years between the Obama administration and the Biden administration? Do these technically competent, highly professional people understand how much the world has changed in just these few years?
So my answer to that is simple, that they do realize the world has changed dramatically, but that's not going to stop them from returning to what they were working on before. So both can be simultaneously true. That when you think about Iran and the JCPOA, that's going to be one of the first items, because they worry that Iran is already testing the resolve of the Biden administration by its decision to increase its uranium enrichment up to 20%. And that is a provocation, and it's one that can be rolled back, but they're going to test the resolve. And the resolve is that the only way back to a renegotiation of the or the re-entry to the JCPOA is the US doing what the Iranians believe it abrogated, which was being supportive of Iran's economic engagement and economic development. That means removing the sanctions, but not only removing the sanctions, it was, when I talked to Javad Zarif, the ambassador of Iran, one time in New York, he said, you are the ones that have violated the agreement because you agreed not to get away in our economic deals. You're going to Europeans saying, don't invest in Iran. That's a violation of the deal. So when you kind of look at each other, what the reasons were we got in, it wasn't that Iran decided to be really, warm and fuzzy all of a sudden, say, oh, we want our nuclear program, so they did it for reasons, and the reasons were this, and we abrogated those in their eyes. So I think I think JCPOA is going to be there. I mean, climate change and the work they put in, Jake Sullivan and many other people put into the work on climate, the Paris Climate Accords, and making those real. That's going to be, a 2.0. There are going to be a lot of 2.0, carrying on where they off. I think that China, Joe Biden was the China handler at the latter part of the Obama administration. Xi Jinping had been the vice premier of China. The vice president became the handler and the Sherpa, if you will, for setting up the Sunnyland Summit between Xi Jinping and Barack Obama. And so they know each other. There's an understanding, and there's going to be a figure. But it's the question of not necessarily understanding that there's now resolve to do something as Congress is one of the things that Trump succeeded in doing. It's just there's no story behind it. There's no industrial policy plan behind it. There's just bluster and posture. But the Democrats are on board with that, and so I think the question is what does Biden do to return to something that has traction, and that's going to feel 2.0. I think that things I was just talking to, right now over Yemen and the rush right now of the administration to classify Cuba as a state sponsor of terror and to classify the Houthis in Yemen as a terrorist organization are creating ripple effects right now, and a lot of consternation. Both in our Congress, Republicans and Democrats are angry and furious at the quick snapshot. But Mark Lowcock, the UN Undersecretary General, challenged the United States in a presentation to the Security Council this morning, where he said, look, you're going to create a famine in this. And the Bidens have already, Biden has already said that he's going to cut off arms sales to the Saudis because of Yemen. So a lot of this is going to be carry on. And so to your point, much has changed in the world. And a lot of countries, you look at France, Macron, Angela Merkel, even Jens Stoltenberg and others that that have one hand, one foot in the U.S. relationship. They now have another foot out where they no longer count on us. And they talk about and frame things as if in a way that we can no longer count on the United States being a dependable partner. And I think that's going to be a hard thing to put back in the bottle. And I think that everyone in the administration realizes that that exists. And I don't know yet, I don't see the outlines of how they're going to deal with it, but I think it's an excellent way to frame.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn it back over to Karen to moderate the questions.
You bet.
Okay, we have a couple of questions, but we also have had in our chat function, I'm just going to segue away from our topic for a moment here. Today is Janet Forster's birthday, so happy birthday to Janet.
Oh, Janet, hi, happy birthday.
All right. Given our continued arms sales to Taiwan, how big a deal is the recent Trump administration move regarding contact with Taiwanese officials?
Well, look, I mean, it's big. I mean, Taiwan is one of these fascinating places right now. It's one of the points that Ambassador Karen Kornbluh just made to me a few minutes ago when I asked her, I said, which country do you think is getting, IT and technology right? And she said, look, Taiwan is Taiwan is a non-nation nation that is getting, it is fighting disinformation in its IT sector. It is had remarkable performance in managing COVID. It has an incredible tech innovation base. It's done a lot of things right. And she says, we'd be wise to sort of study a lot of things they're doing. What we're doing with Taiwan right now and the direction we're going is, and maybe it needs to be destabilized. I don't want to comment. I haven't thought enough about it. But we are encouraging a course for Taiwan that is provocative toward China, that may test China's decision on whether it maintains the status quo or not. The Kissingerian equation of between China and Taiwan and the PRC is one where a status quo is preserved, but China every once in a while tests that, and Taiwanese politicians test that. But right now, some members of the administration, including the ambassador to the United Nations, want to test that in that balance and put their weight on one side of the equation because they want to have a collision with China. And the problem with that is that raises very, very deep problems. Taiwan is not geographically close to the United States. We've just seen essentially what has evolved in Hong Kong, where any protests, sanctions, issues we've raised with regard to Chinese clamping down on Hong Kong and essentially not caring anymore about the golden eggs of Hong Kong because it has its own financial bourses and activity that dwarf and challenge the size of Hong Kong. That China is violating its deal and understanding in Hong Kong. So if you put Taiwan in a situation where it becomes vulnerable to that, my view is, this is the world of realpolitik. It becomes very, very hard, particularly with the United States alone, not allied with other nations, to the degree that we should, to create the infrastructure of condemnation and the infrastructure of costs for China should it try to reincorporate forcefully Taiwan. But that's what we're flirting with right now. That's how scary the world is. That's just my own view. I recognize other people think it's unfair to Taiwan, but I worry that Taiwan's interests right now are not in destabilizing that at a moment when the American security guarantee in this region is so in doubt.
Thank you. Do you think that after China taking over Hong Kong with relatively few consequences, they are willing to militarily take over Taiwan? That's a related question.
Absolutely. I mean, if we were to basically somehow flirt with recognizing Taiwan to begin sending U.S. officials. I mean, I remember I worked in the United States Senate when Lee Teng-hui was allowed to come over and all hell broke loose. Now, that was in the 1990s, but Lee Teng-hui, then the president of Taiwan. But I think that China, Xi Jinping, and the myth of his leadership of succeeding Deng Xiaoping and his territorial ambitions of reincorporating these elements of what they believe, what Chinese believe to be their historic footprint in the world, is one that I would not mess with right now. I believe that the combination of Xi Jinping and the power that he has at the moment, combined with that, that playing around with aspirations that Taiwanese may legitimately have about where they want to go, without having a firm resolve about what the costs and consequences of that are going to be. And the United States is part of that, so may be other nations in that area. But I can't see Japan doing much there. I can't see South Korea doing much, or Australia, or anyone there. So it's us. And I think us alone doesn't win for Taiwan. So I think in that circumstance, if provoked, we could run the risk of look, we have a world where nothing that I just said a moment ago, nothing that we've been taking for granted, can we continue to take for granted? This is a time of change where highly unlikely things are likely. And that includes a potential Chinese military intervention in Taiwan. Sorry to be so long-winded, but it's a good question, and it haunts me right now.
Well, we all seem to be asking questions about China. So how should the U.S. go forward with China, determining our security interest, global presence, the support of our Asian allies, etc., while giving due respect to China's growing power and position as a regional power?
I know this is going to sound weird, but we should triple the budget of the National Science Foundation. We should promote greater networks and support for university partnership with our national labs. We should create incentives for transatlantic technology cooperation and reseeding this. We should begin removing tons of the restrictions, particularly on European and other global talent coming into U.S. universities. What China is afraid of, how are you going to compete with China? Power is like the stock market. It's a function of future expectations. You don't have to go to war today. I mean, China right now still is a powerful, it's a developed country, but it's developing fast. It's got a lot of problems out there, but it's the future position that gives China, or the belief in its future position that gives China a premium on its power now. America in the aggregate is a hugely powerful country that looks like it's fumbling its own ball, that it's kicking down its own hill that it built up as king of the hill. And that creates a diminishment of respect and a diminishment of the sense of the power of the United States, even though in real terms, America is an incredibly powerful nation. Right? So you need to think not in terms of how many bases we have, what throw power you can throw at people. The question is, the mystique of being a superpower is combined in all of these elements that are brought together to make us look as if we are the most determinant nation when it comes to sculpting the international order. And part of that is science, capability, innovation, the health of our economy, and moving these things forward. Cutting things that are basically high risk and low return, like endless wars in Afghanistan. I remember, I've told the story to you guys folks, to all of you before, but it really happened where I went to China many, many years ago, and I met the equivalent of their policy planning director in their Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I asked that person, I said, tell me, what is China's grand strategy in the world? And the answer was, our grand strategy is how to keep you Americans distracted in small Middle Eastern countries. So it was a joke, but there's an element of reality there. America's strategic course has been more decided by reacting to things and by being distracted by things as to the strategy of where it goes. What it needs to do is get its economic house in order, get its manufacturing muscle, restore, we're now at a trade war with China over steel and soybeans and agricultural products. We should be worried about AI, quantum computing, Internet of Things, data, cybersecurity. These are the areas where power is going to be negotiated and fought over between those stakeholders in the world. And we need to be acting as if those are the areas we want to negotiate around, and where we want to get the greatest degree of investment and human capital focused on, and do that in a way where China feels that strength. That's a different kind of strength than ships and planes, which also matter. But it's a mistake to think that national security posturing of a military capacity abroad is all that matters with China. It just absolutely does not. And guess what? By the way, because we have had endless wars in Afghanistan, and because my many cousins and second cousins and third cousins are tired of fighting those wars and to become pugnacious anti-international nationalists, they recognize that the American stomach for taking on adversaries for China, like right now, is not very strong. And so that is fueling China's pugnaciousness itself and its course and direction. So what we need to do is restore balance and order, where we are integrated, where we get health. And like I said, I would do symbolic things. Fund the NSF, triple its budget. It's $8 billion, go to $24 billion. But it would send a signal that we're going to invest in science, AI, not fall behind on these things, and make that part of our muscle. And I think that is the piece that's missing. If we're going to compete against Huawei, then what is the U.S. competitor to that? We have none, by the way. So there's Nokia and Ericsson, which are Europe-based and have none of the financial infrastructure to help them to compete globally. So create that. If Nokia and Ericsson are the champions that we have to run with, well, then run with them and provide that in a way that now China recognizes it has an adversary that understands what the game is, so that they either get Huawei to behave, or we split into a splinterverse and we have different standards, which would be its own nightmare. But these are the kinds of questions we should be discussing at a senior level, and we're not. We're discussing, how can you beat up China? How can we not beat up on China? That's not the point. The point is, how do you get your collective assets to be stronger and healthier than right now? Because China smells strategic contraction by the United States from the world, and what H.R. McMaster calls a strategic narcissism, where everything, his former national security advisor to President Trump, wrote a great book recently, and he believes that America's got to become strategically empathetic rather than strategically narcissistic. It needs to begin looking at these other realities in the world where it doesn't necessarily put itself in the middle of everything. That would be a healthy move, because when we begin doing that, other nations will begin reaffiliating with us and finding common cause with us. That is a way you confront China.
Thank you. How should the incoming administration respond to digital services taxes directed at U.S. companies?
Oh, God, I don't know. I think the digital service tax, this is, as I understand it, primarily a issue of Europe. We have to negotiate it. You got to believe in this world that truth is negotiated now, or history is negotiated, and taxes are negotiated. This notion again that we have some sort of sacred space. I remember, and Sky does probably too, and many of you do, in the 1980s, the big question between Japan and the United States was a different one, but it was also a tax question of whether the unitary tax in California would be applied to a corporation's assets all over the world based in California, or whether it would be, a national based or state based. And there were these efforts to look at tax policy one way or another. And believe me, there was a lot of consternation between Japan and the United States over the unitary tax issue. Now, the digital service taxes, whether or not digital services are somehow unique from other services or not, the Europeans are saying they're not. We are saying, yes, they are. And it's going to be a function of, a lot of things that we trade. And, I am one who believes that the innovation sector, I just did an event with, the information technology sector, is one where there's continues to be huge promise, and the less encumbrances you put in its way on the innovation front, the better. We need to get other things like privacy right, which we haven't done anything on. We need to get the issue of how do you deal with content curation and, the battles we've been seeing over software platforms and what can be said and what can't be said by presidents and chancellors and other folks. That's another dimension to this. How do we get things like facial recognition software not to be used as an enemy of the people and as a friend of the people? I mean, I think these are all questions that have to be done. And within that realm, something like digital service tax will be negotiated. But that's where I'll leave that.
Thank you. Given the current domestic state, do you think it's possible for the Biden administration to pass intense gun laws, such as red flag laws, or do you think this could lead to more division and social unrest?
I think there will be. So the adjective that you use, the robust, is one where I think the degree of robustness is going to be lots of shades of gray. I don't see any way that Biden, who now the Democrats have the Senate by a 1-vote majority with Kamala Harris's tie-breaking vote, and with the House, don't pass some element of gun control. Now, whether it's red flag, whether, what dimension of it, I don't know what that will be. I mean, they haven't been able to get, background checks universally through. So, I think that but I think there will be a lower tier. If you kind of use the Joe Manchin, Pat Toomey benchmark on what they were trying to do on benchmark, in that area, I sort of look at that lower tier as something that will definitely be part of the Biden agenda and that they will definitely try and pass. And because Joe Manchin is the most conservative member of the Democratic caucus in the Senate, I think he is going to dictate what that will be, and they will succeed at. And I think they'll bring over Pat Toomey, and they'll bring over a couple of other Republicans, and they'll say it's bipartisan. But I would not say that that would characterize robust for me. It would be the minimal threshold. But right now, the NRA and a lot of folks in the gun world, and I'm very conscious of the fact of where Colorado Springs is located, and your neighboring congressional district has a House member who may have carried a gun onto the floor of the House the other day. So I know it's a controversial issue, but my view is I think that is what will happen, but it will not be necessarily robust. It will be a minimal threshold, but that will go in. And the question is, will that further divide the country? Yes, it will further divide the country, but I think it will also bring a lot of independent Americans and a lot of Republicans who think something must be done over, and they will try and rearrange that, and in that same moment try to further neutralize and undo some of the power of the National Rifle Association.
Do you think this administration could possibly pass the ERA?
I do. It comes up a lot. I have to admit that right now, that's not something I have focused on a lot. It comes up every once in a while in the forums that I organize on gender justice issues, inclusion, and whatnot. I need to go back, and I just need to go and study up on where that process is and whether or not just a simple majority vote gets us there now, whether or not with the legislatures, with all the legislatures, I just don't know. I haven't tuned in to where I know we were right on the edge of having enough legislatures that had passed this. I think with Virginia was going to be one of the last that could get there, and I just have to go back and tune in. But it comes up an awful lot here. I tell you, the two things that come off a lot that I need to tool into a bit and study into are the ERA, Equal Rights Amendment for Women in the Constitution, and the other thing is statehood for DC and Puerto Rico. So all of a sudden, with the results in the Senate, that statehood situation for DC dramatically changes potentially. And so we'll have to see where that goes. But those are the two that I don't know enough about, but I think are coming up more and more because of the surprising result in the Senate.
Are there any forward-looking Kissinger-type personalities in view, either in the new administration or outside?
Well, so good question. I'm hoping Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, is a Kissinger-like guy, but he may be, Kissinger combined with, I love Jake Sullivan. He's a good friend, but he's a little bit of a chameleon. He was a National Security Advisor for Biden. He worked for Obama, and he worked for Hillary Clinton. And if you compare the foreign policy strategic frameworks that each of those three people have, and those are just Democrats, they're radically different. They're radically different. In many ways, Donald Trump was somehow, much closer to Barack Obama than Barack Obama was to Hillary Clinton, or Trump was Hillary Clinton. So, but Jake was in the middle of all. He's very, very, very smart. I think he's got a good national. I don't know how it's going to hang in terms of identifying a doctrine down the road. So we'll have to see. He's not a classic realist. The person that I've always called the new Kissinger that the Democrats have, or the Kissinger that they may not know they have, is Bill Burns, who's currently president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He was Deputy Secretary of State. He was Undersecretary of State as well. He was the ambassador to Russia for the United States, and he is a brilliant. He would be a great character in a John le Carre novel if le Carre were still around. And he's now going to become CIA director. So he was just nominated to be director of the CIA. I think he's someone who has enormous capacity. He is probably the most clear-headed realist in the classical realist sense of engage your enemies, don't get carried away in crusades person in the Biden world. Jake Sullivan, I think, is able to float in a lot of areas. He's fundamentally a realist, perhaps, but he's able to play with other schools of foreign policy thought. But Bill Burns would be my character in that, probably not well known to everyone, but he's a very, very important, very thoughtful person. And I think I don't remember the name of the book, but he had a very good book come out on foreign policy about 2 years ago.
Thank you. What would you see as an effective, quote unquote, Biden doctrine that would complement Biden's interpersonal skills and relationships with other states' leaders, which you spoke of before, in order to rebuild U.S. soft power?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think that Joe Biden needs to articulate something that is a hybrid of the interest-based framework, you know, a Scowcroftian, you know, Sky Forrester is listening to this. He was like the Scowcroft professor at the U.S. Air Force Academy, good friends with Brent Scowcroft, but a national security that essentially was interest-driven, but able to do good things in the world when you could do them. In other words, I think the big tension in foreign policy, and I apologize to anyone that I am unintentionally irritating with this, but the tension in foreign policy is between some groups that want to do good in the world without regard to what the cost to the United States would be. And, you know, I think that the Biden doctrine will have some of those people. Samantha Power, I don't want to, you know, recklessly call her, she's one of those, but she does lead as one of the leading global justice figures, thought leaders, and political leaders in the nation. And she's going to become just been announced as the nominee to head the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. And I think Samantha and some of those folks believe in global justice and are willing to commit a lot to it. Anne-Marie Slaughter, you know, another who used to be head of policy planning at the State Department, is now running an institution I used to be affiliated with, New America right now, has written a lot about, you know, the American idea and American commitment, the right to protect, you know, and whatnot. All of that sounds good, but at the end of the day, it has to be a sustainable foreign policy. In fact, maybe this is it. Maybe what Joe Biden has to do is to be the author of sustainable foreign policy. And what that means is that sustainable foreign policy is that whatever you do in the world, you have to make sure that America has equal or greater capacity to continue to do other things. And other things, if you diminish or you undermine America's ability to do something in the world, like go to war in Afghanistan for 18 years, diminish America's mystique and credibility in the world, make it look as if this was you know, an exhausting event that makes other nations feel like you wouldn't go to war with them. That is a terrible thing to do, no matter what the cause is, no matter how many women are educated in Afghan schools, no matter what civil society you help create, that the cost to American society and American stature in the world is so significant because it inhibits your ability to go do good things elsewhere. You need to be able to do an Afghanistan project within the confines of not diminishing America's abilities elsewhere. And I think that sustainability, that kind of realism applied to trying to do great and good things in the world is something that we need to do right now. And that would be a way to connect Joe Biden's personality and you know, individualistic, focused, relationship-based foreign policy skills with something that had greater structure. And that is that things should go through that filter. And it means that you're going to be strategically cautious, but you're going to try and look at, you know, if we go get involved in climate change, you know, John Kerry is now going to be the guy there. And John Kerry, Senator Kerry is like, you know, Senator Kerry is one of the very few people. And usually when an administration comes in, you know, you do have Pete Buttigieg at transportation, so he's one of the people who ran for president. But Amy Klobuchar is not there, Elizabeth Warren's not there, Bernie Sanders not there. You know, you get usually, you know, Barack Obama put Hillary Clinton there. You know, one of George W. Bush's big rivals was Colin Powell. He put Colin Powell in his state. So Joe Biden is not doing that. He doesn't look at John Kerry as a rival, but John Kerry's a big personality, but he's the only big personality in the score of people. Everyone else looks like someone who knows how Joe Biden operates. So if he lifts up his arms, if he raises an eyebrow, they know how to scurry and go run to do what he wants to do. This is not going to be a group that freelances or showboats. They are going to be very, very tuned in to the Biden plan. And I'm not sure I haven't decided yet whether that's good or bad, but it is what we have for the moment. But John Kerry is the exception. John Kerry is a showboat. John Kerry is flamboyant. John Kerry is going to go shame other nations and shame Americans and try to basically put climate in the front there. And that could be a good thing. But I think at the end of the day, you know, when you kind of look at this question of how do we achieve, you know, a Biden doctrine that works there, it's going to have to be a melding of what he does on personality and politics, but, you know, taking something like climate and do it in a way that creates a return, a restoration of American mystique. Because if you're able to do something and move the needle on climate in a positive and constructive way and actually do something, and John Kerry can deliver that, that's going to help countries take you seriously on other things that are unrelated. That's what I mean by sustainable foreign policy.
Thank you. How worried are you about the potential or likelihood of extreme violence in Washington next week?
Very worried.
I'll tag on. Can you speak a little bit about national security implications related to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, look, I'm not predicting this will happen. But, you know, my dad was in the U.S. Air Force, right? My dad, I grew up as a military Department of Defense brat. I was an Air Force ROTC. I mean, same thing for many of you, I'm sure. Many of you probably served in various ways. And I think it is appalling to me and worrying that we're getting intelligence reports of potential in-service military, in-service National Guards people, and veterans who've been somehow radicalized in the QAnon world, who are part of white supremacist online networks. These are the kinds of things that in years past I talked to you about in a kind of way that seems sterile and far away about what was going on in the Middle East. Conspiracy theories in the Middle East were running rampant. You know, the ability for ISIS and Al-Qaeda types to radicalize people online and bring them to the... What we're seeing is an American variant of that, where those practices that we used to look at abroad in these other areas have become tools that are used, you know, not in the same content, not in the same way, but to radicalize, to create community, to kind of pull people together. And some of these people exist within trusted networks of our protectors, of our force. And today, I just tweeted out a little while ago, Vice has an important story where, you know, various white supremacist groups are calling on, you know, armed folks in the military to come over to the other side and to engage in selected killings of people. We know that the Capitol Police briefed senators. I talked to one of the senators personally about it at dinner last night, and that this vision of potentially 4,000 or so armed people come and encircle the Capitol to try and prevent incursions or excursions and, you know, come armed. Who knows if it's true, but the fact was the Capitol Police briefed senators on various scenarios of what they were worried about, what could happen. They were very dark, and they involved assassinations, they involved targeting, and they involved with us. And then we saw in the video, unfortunately, of the other day of the January 6th attacks, you know, people in uniform, and we've seen police officers, veterans, and others identified that were part of that. So I worry about that a lot because we pretend that these things aren't real and aren't happening. I think the Capitol Police never thought that a crowd this size, that Americans, and they did, white Americans, right? There's an element of race here we have to deal with. They never thought that white Americans going to hear the President of the United States would be dispatched essentially to attack the Congress. They misread the situation clearly, or someone misread it, or they purposely misread it. I don't know. But I think that the issue is we saw an incredible amount of violence, and we saw at least the fringe, a small fringe of these people, you know, in any movement, and anybody that's kind of studied, you know, his intelligence and security, you know, I don't want to ascribe to everyone who did this level of sophistication and coordination, but there were a certain number of people that were highly coordinated, highly sophisticated, and highly skilled that were at the forefront of this. And they did go to hidden offices, the hideouts of various congressmen, looking for them. And so there were elements of intelligence, discipline, and strategy involved with what happened on January 6th. So I believe that the chatter that we're hearing about from the police, from the Homeland Security folks, and from intelligence agencies about a domestic violent group of people feeling empowered and connected is extremely worrisome. And, you know, I think that hopefully we're all wrong. Hopefully we're weathermen in this without perfect inputs, and that we're predicting a big storm that will fizzle. And I'm hoping with the deployment of force, with what I see happening in Washington right now, that at least in DC and hopefully elsewhere in the country, this fizzles and just becomes, you know, a nothing burger. And if it does, then we can all say, well, we were stupid and idiots. But in fact, maybe our talking about it and raising it will help to neutralize it. But I just don't know. I worry about it a lot because I've never seen this town this way. And when I went up, I was not there at the Capitol when the assault was going on. I was there later that night and went in there when they were dealing with the certification of the votes, and was outside the Capitol, talked to a number of senators, smelled the tear gas, saw the broken glass. It's hard to, it's something you, despite the debate we just had about impeachment, it's just something you can't walk away from. The US Congress was assaulted, and if somebody had gone up there with an AK-47, it would have been a very different picture. And you know, but there were pipe bombs, there were people were killed. It's just, it makes me sick and disgusted, and I don't think we can underestimate it.
Thank you for that comment. Just a quick question, circling back to H.R. McMaster's. Why not McMaster's somewhere in the Biden administration?
Well, I think that would be a very wise thing. You know, H.R. is a skeptic of going back to the Iran deal. H.R. is a skeptic of leaving Afghanistan. I don't agree with him on those views, but I respect him tremendously. And I think that he has, you know, a strategic view of the world, and he is an interesting and thoughtful person. And it is very, very useful not to have everyone on your team thinking the same thing. So I would, if I were, you know, advising Biden, I would bring back an H.R. McMaster. He's exactly the kind of person that I would bring on. I would make another element that even though H.R. McMaster seethes in his book at Zal Khalilzad and these efforts to negotiate American exit from Afghanistan and to negotiate with the Taliban, I also like Zal Khalilzad. I think I've heard many very thoughtful people that used to work with Richard Holbrooke, people that used to work with Hillary Clinton, you know, the sort of smartest people on the AFPAC region that I know, off the record saying the most important thing Biden can do right now, no matter how this goes with Afghanistan, is to keep Zal Khalilzad in place, because the intelligence, the way he's been dealing with people, you don't know how it's going to come. There's no necessarily automatic predictable end. So there are people like that makes it a lot of sense to come in, because you don't want Joe Biden to also fall into the camp that because he's brought in all these staffers who know him well, who all work together, you know, to a certain degree in a certain way, that they're going to become blind, have blind spots, because they all essentially are of the same DNA. So I am totally support someone like H.R. McMaster coming back in, if they were to be smart enough to do it, which I'm not sure they are.
Okay, next question. With the turmoil in our national dialogue, especially in social media, but also in traditional media, and the way information seems to be increasingly pitched for echo chambers, what hope do you see for Americans to begin having more respectful discourse and to begin to regain a shared foundation of fact? That is an excellent question, in my opinion.
It's a really excellent question, and it's a really hard battle. We have very poor digital hygiene. You know, the Edelman Trust Barometer, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, came out yesterday. It's worth taking a look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, just issued by Edelman. It measures levels of trust in NGOs, in the media, in government, and in business in 27 different countries. And the levels of trust in media, my folks, and in the government are like at an all-time low in America. Businesses have risen, NGOs not doing great. But I think in the middle of all of this, when you kind of look at this question there about news media, where people, you know, what do people trust? The issue is 1/3, 30 some odd percent of the public is able to sort through various media, to sort through these things and have resilience against disinformation. And, you know, I hate using the term fake news, but there is fake news, you know, disinformation campaigns and whatnot, because they have good digital hygiene, and they have good news and information hygiene of looking at multiple sources, looking beyond their information bubble, looking in these. But the vast majority of Americans don't do that. And it's very hard to figure out, okay, what are our habits going to be? What's the killer app to get that another third of Americans to turn on their critical thinking skills, to turn themselves on to views that are alternative to their own, to look at how you go to more sources and look at that. I highly recommend people go look at that section of the Edelman Trust Barometer, again, just released yesterday, because I think it does a good job of looking at, there are a lot of efforts out there. You know, Karen Kornblue runs this, you know, digital innovation and literacy initiative at the German Marshall Fund, which again, all of it is online. And she had a piece in the Washington Post yesterday, an op-ed, again, on this very same subject, and looking at, you know, America's debilitating digital disinformation problem. And I think that the solution to it is you fix where you can. You try to get filters out there to advise. You try to get people like Glenn Klesser at the Washington Post that can point to things, but it's not enough. Fundamentally, people need to swim towards places that are largely have good digital, you know, hygiene habits, if you will, and swim skeptically with those that aren't. And that's going to be a hard habit change. So I don't see any magic solution or wand or near-term prospect of solving this problem. And I'm trying to think through the bank shots to get us there. Maybe we need to have an all-out war with each other to solve it, so that one side wins and the other side loses. And, you know, don't take me seriously there. I just think it's a huge problem, and I don't know how to. I'm in the media, and I do not know how to do it.
Okay, I am going to skip down to this question. I have not seen any messaging to our friends, allies, and adversaries as to the state of our posture towards the outside world. How might leaders convey the message that, yes, our politics are messy, but our national defense is secure, or perhaps, and scarily so, it is not? Thoughts?
Well, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I will try. I think that what the world has just seen is General Mark Milley, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the other commandant commanders and Joint Chiefs write a letter to every member of the armed military force saying your oath is to the Constitution, and that is all. I mean, your oath is to the Constitution of the United States, and you need to remember that. And it's basically to deal with this issue that I talked about before, about concerns of people feeling as if they are loyal to something other than that. I think that step is the kind of step that restores faith that others have in the solvency of governance in the US military. But I think that there are, that the bigger issues are that if you're looking at the state of, you say, US-Japan relations and the US-Japan Mutual Security Treaty, or the state of, you know, South Korean-American relations, which have been, you know, very bizarre because of the courtship with Kim Jong-un and North Korea that produced, in my view, less security, probably more likelihood that they deepen their nuclear program and whatnot. But I want to go down that rabbit hole. But these relationships have been tested in a lot of ways. And so a lot of leaders during the Trump administration tried to pretend, like Abe in Japan, that they had a fantastic relationship with Donald Trump, that they could call Donald Trump, that if you read John Bolton's book, I'm no fan of President Trump, but where you could see that Japan was a key player, Japan had this, you talk to the, you know, Japanese foreign ministry and defense ministry and people there, they would say that. But deep down, they didn't trust the United States. Deep down, they knew Trump could change on a dime. Deep down, they kept hearing Trump saying, you need to triple what you pay us to be there or we're going to walk away. You know, I listened to Donald Trump when he made his first trip to South Korea, and he went to the base, I can't forget the name of it, but the US base that is about 30 kilometers south of the DMZ now. And it's where our US forces there are based. And I was on MSNBC at 3 in the morning listening to a speech. It was an okay speech. It was a scripted speech, and he read from the teleprompter until the end. In the end, I was on with Richard Louie. He says, this base, I could have built it much faster than we built it. I could have built it under budget. And this base isn't even for US security anyway, it's for your security. And with those words, he undid the entire reason he went to South Korea and to Asia, which was to convince our allies in Asia that their security was joined at the hip with American security. With those words, which weren't reported widely in the press, he shook the national security foundations of South Korea, but also of Japan, saying, this is a president that does not value these alliances. So how do you restore trust in that? it's going to require testing, because by just saying it won't matter to them, because they've now had the demonstration effect of someone who doesn't believe and is not dependable on those. So the tragedy of the situation is right now is that there are going to be moments where Biden is tested over and over and over again. It came up recently in the first discussion with Prime Minister Suga with Biden after elect, where the Senkaku Islands came up. So Biden proactively mentioned the Senkaku Islands and that U.S. would be there. But in the U.S. readout, they did not appear. They did appear in the Japanese readout, and they resolved it. But it's these little things that create doubts. Is America really true and authentic right now or not? And so to the questioner, I would say what we're going to require is a tactician's obsession with restoring strategic trust in a way where we show in these micro cases over and over again our resolve to be with them in the right things in the right ways without having wars to prove that. And I think that's going to be a very hard thing to do.
All right, thank you. What places in the world do you see for the U.S. giving effort that will create positive gains for our interests and our global progress?
I apologize. Could you say that one more time?
What places, I think, what physical locations do you see that the U.S. are giving effort? And I'm assuming he's talking about things like USAID here, that will create positive gains for our interests and global progress.
Well, we haven't yet because we don't have a new administration. And I would say that, look, the one area, there are very few areas, but, you know, I interviewed Robert O'Brien, the president's national security advisor, recently, and I have a lot of respect for him, actually. He, you know, in hostages, in terrorism, in dealing with some elements of the China challenge in Huawei. I'm not a fan of how the administration has dealt with COVID, but there have been some important international coordination and sort of less reported successes on COVID internationally that the administration has been a part of. These have all been relatively good terrain to deal with joint problems on. The Abraham Accords with Israel, I was not a fan of moving the capital to Israel. I'm not a fan of just doing all of these things on the Israeli side of the equation, disregarding the Palestinian circumstances and pushing them to the side and cutting deals with UAE. I think at the end of the day, it's still good that the UAE and Bahrain and other nations are normalizing with Israel and have changed the map there for the first time in 25 years. I think that the administration's efforts to grudgingly drag Saudi Arabia and Qatar together is a good thing. It's better to have, I mean, the Qatar embargo, where America has its largest base in the Middle East, is an awkward thing because Qataris fly through Iranian airspace. But if we had a, you know, believe me, if we had a kinetic problem in the Middle East, it's complicated because we're going to have U.S. military flights and whatnot in Qatar flying through certain airspace, private flights from Qatar Airways flying through Iranian airspace. They all say they have it figured out, and that's a lie. The fact is we have an unresolved situation where Saudi Arabia and Qatar's, I put the blame on Saudi Arabia actually in this case, but in the Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar divorce, the strategic irresponsibility of that for their ally, the United States, has been palpable and needed to be resolved. And I give credit to the Trump administration for somehow using these final days of pressure to pull it around. And I think it's Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who's in part worried about the hand he has to play with the Biden people. He's gone in so deep with Trump that they don't have many things to do. So I think this would be one of the things. So this is all territory that wasn't awful, that, you know, could be good. But when it comes to Biden coming in, you know, I think he's going to go hug NATO. I think he's going to go rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. I think he's going to, you know, get in there and try to reassure alliances. I think he's going to try to reassure, the big joke going around town is Canada and Mexico now want to build their own walls to keep us out as fast as possible, and they're willing to pay for it. But I think that I think he's going to have to do a lot of strategic reassurance, and I think it's global, not just, here and there. But things like USAID can be used in trust building in symbolic ways with certain countries. And I think one of the areas where it's going to matter is in COVID and vaccinations, because there are a lot of parts of the world that cannot afford the vaccinations, that are not going to be automatically taken care of. America can easily and relatively inexpensively become a key provider in that area. We have Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We have, the various other international groups that have been part of that. And this would follow a little bit what George W. Bush did with PEPFAR and HIV/AIDS in Africa, of creating and saving millions of lives. So doing something like that can have a surround sound effect of having really good positive echo effect of something that would be a relatively modest initiative. But that means you've got to go out and say that those lives over there matter, and that American interests and America in the world benefits from doing that. And that's the conversation with the pugnacious side of America that we need to have. We need them to understand it's in their interests for that to happen. And so that's part of the dialogue that has to happen, both the domestic part of the dialogue connected to, an international initiative. I'll tell you one of the people to read in this, and he's had a piece in Foreign Affairs, and I had an interview with him recently on my Al Jazeera show called The Bottom Line, is former World Bank President Robert Zoellick, who was also former Deputy Secretary of State. Zoellick has written a great book on, the history of American foreign policy that just came out this past year, which is excellent. And he's really good at looking at America's complicated domestic agenda and saying, by solving some of these things and finding international partnerships, America can kind of bring itself back into compliance, if you will, of a healthy global engagement again, without kind of creating this demarcation between, its domestic affairs and the international scene. We have to erase and blur those lines and get people to realize that our domestic situation is connected to our international engagement.
Okay, we are almost out of time, and so I'm going to finish up with one last question related to, you mentioned Africa. With Susan Rice and Linda Thomas Greenfield in the administration, how do you see Africa play, sub-Saharan Africa, in our foreign policy?
I think it's going to be a priority, but I think that there are complications there, because we see a lot of, again, the ongoing challenge in sub-Saharan Africa of, those of a have and have not problem, that those nations with oil, have corrupt situations, those nations with not. It's a complicated neighborhood, complicated leadership. I think we're going to be involved, but Susan Rice won't be involved with it. I think Linda will be a very good fact, but I think we need to not typecast that just because we have African-American members in the administration that they are the ones that are going to handle it. It has to become a cause for the administration, because they believe that Africa matters, the direction it matters, it needs to be going. And I believe that's where Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken will keep it relatively high on their strategic dashboard. Because if they don't, guess what happens? It becomes a new next round and new terrain for the kind of terrorism that we used to see from North Africa. And we began to see that a bit, in this, and the Europeans are very, very worried about it. So stabilizing and creating a, much more constructive relationship with Africa will be on the scene. But interestingly, Susan Rice, that's not going to be her agenda. Susan Rice is going to be the domestic policy advisor. That's a head scratcher that surprised me and caught me off guard, and that can be a topic for another day.
Okay, let me just say to all of everybody who's with us today, our next speaker series webinar is February 9th. It is presented in cooperation with World Denver and the Colorado Colorado Foothills World Affairs Council. And this program is entitled Bipartisanship in Foreign Policy, the Conversation America Needs. It'll be a moderated discussion between former Democratic presidential primary candidate Wesley Clark and Larry Hogan of Maryland. Rob Quirk at KOAA will serve as the moderator. So for more information, please check our website.
That's going to be a good show.
Pardon?
That's going to be a great show.
Well, please log in. We'd love to have you. I'll send you an invitation. So please visit our website at csworldaffairs.org. And Sky, I wondered if you just wanted to finish up with a thank you to Steve, and I thank you as well.
Absolutely. And I think I'm not muted. Yeah. Steve, I think it's fair to say you have an open invitation to join any and all programs we ever have, including in person, and I'll buy lunch. By the way, the book that you talked about from Bill Burns is Back Channel, which I used with my students a year ago, and it is indeed excellent. Steve, thank you for yet another tour de force of a conversation we could have gone on all day, and I'm not sure there was a subject we didn't address in one way, shape, or form, which just is testament to your expertise and continued engagement. Thanks again from all of us, and we wish you well.
Well,
Yes.
you're very kind, and I want to apologize. I know I packed a lot in. I talked fast and got it in there. I apologize for the change today. I had a colleague who was ill, and I had to stand in for that colleague, and other colleagues who could come in can't get into Washington, into our studio right now because of all the shutdowns. So it was, we're living in real time in these, ways to do it. So please accept my apologies for having to start this late, and I hope it was useful for folks. And again, I know I talked fast, but wanted to give you the full Monty.
Well, we're able to listen fast, so it's okay. We hope you stay safe next week.
Yes.
And every week.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.